So if you read our literature, what we notice, and the historical accounts, not just literature, look at the historical accounts, the accounts of the travelers and so on, what we find is that Indians have gone far and wide on the seafaring routes. On the east, they have gone up to, the Chola kings have gone up to, Java and Sumatra and so on. You read it in history. The Pandya kings were able to take pearls, wood, steel, all that, and they can go up to, Arabia and then, Roman Empire. These kinds of accounts are there. So all these point to the fact that somewhere this shipbuilding technology ought to be there. Otherwise, you can't take a small boat and go several thousand miles on an ocean. That's not going to work anyway. So therefore, Indians ought to have been good in shipbuilding. So we will start with a quote from a French writer, Solvins, in 1811. He, in his work called The Lee Hindus, he writes something. He says, in ancient times, the Indians excelled in the art of constructing vessels. The present Hindus can, in this respect, still offer models to Europe. That's what he says. Then he says, the English, attentive to everything which relates to naval architecture, have borrowed from the Hindus many improvements which they have adopted with success to their own shipbuilding, whatever. The Indian vessels unite elegance and utility and are models of patience and fine workmanship. So this is what this 1811 work by this Frenchman seems to say. If you look at the Sangam and the Buddhist literature, say Sangam literature is BC, up to 1st century CE in Tamil Nadu. That's 2400 years old literature. Sangam literature, for example, the early Tamil literature of the Sangam period, which is, as I told you before, the common era, and the foreign travelers' chronicles have actually details of Indian shipping and maritime trade. The Chola kings, Rajaraja Chola I, 985 to 1014 CE, and Rajendra Chola, his son, 1014 CE to 1042 CE, carried maritime activities with countries of the Far East and China. Tamil Pandya embassies were received by Augustus Caesar. These kinds of literary evidences are there. These Tamil works, Purananuru, Ahananuru and Madurai Kanchi, these works delineated different types of sea-going ships. So, all these circumstantially gives us an understanding that these 2500 years they were actually building ships which can go far and wide actually. On the other hand, if you look at Jataka stories as well as the Buddhist accounts and paintings, they all show that Buddhists were involved in maritime trade. Prince Vijaya, who was banished by his father, sailed from Bengal in a fleet of ships carrying more than 700 passengers. That's what you find from some of these Jataka stories and so on. The ship in which the bride of Vijaya came to Ceylon is supposed to have carried nearly 800 persons. The ship of Janaka Jataka carried 700 persons besides Buddha, and that of the Valahasa Jataka carried 500 merchants. The Shanka Jataka was 800 cubits, which is about 360 meters in length, 600 cubits, which is about 275 meters in breadth, and about 36.6 meters in depth, and had 3 masts. In that, these kinds of descriptions are there in the Buddhist literature, so which again points to the fact that as early as 2000, maybe 2200 years back, 2300 years back, Indians knew how to build ships on which they can set course to far off places. Now, on the other hand, if you look at Arthashastra, which is again 2nd century BC, 1st century BC, again 300 years back, if you look at Arthashastra, in book 7 of Arthashastra, there are 3 classes of water routes have been specified. One is the ordinary river route, as well as artificial waterways or canals called kulya. Then routes for coastal traffic, carrying on interportal communications called Kulapata and ocean routes called Samyanapata. So there are these kinds of differences available in Arthashastra. Arthashastra also talks about different categories of ships and boats in book 2. As you know, Arthashastra has 15 books. So in book 2 there is a vivid description of different categories of ships. For example, Samyata Nava. This is an ocean going vessel. It is mentioned that these ships had to pay tolls at the harbors of which they touched actually. Then you have Pravahana, which is another name for sea-going vessels. You have Shankamukta, Grahaniya Nava, Shankamukta Grahaniya Nava, which were boats used for pearl fishing and so on. You have Mahanava, which were the larger vessels for use in larger rivers that were navigable throughout the year. And then you have Kshudraka Nava, which were smaller boats for use in small and shallow rivers that overflowed in the rains. And then you have Himsaka, which are pirate ships and boats. All kinds of descriptions you find in Arthashastra. So these references and literary and archaeological evidence clearly point to established maritime trade and inland water transport systems aiding trade and commerce. Interestingly or surprisingly, whichever way you want to take it, information on the details of shipbuilding is scanty in Indian literature. What I mean by that is the real technology of the process of how do you put things, but there are certain details available. Yukti Kalpataru, for example, is a work in the 11th century CE, and in 2 chapters it deals with ships and gives details about their construction, varieties, measurements, sizes, decoration, accommodation, etc. When you say construction, not in great details, but there are certain details available. Actually, in Yukti Kalpataru, several issues are discussed, and these include the characteristics of varieties of woods most suited for the construction of ships, seasons suited for shipbuilding, classification of vessels for river going and sea going and their names and respective measurements and so on, painting and decoration of ships, tying of iron nail to a sea-going vessel, ships with cabins, etc. See, if this much of intricate details are there, obviously they must be, these are all not hypothetical details. Obviously they must be actually building ships. Unfortunately, this technology of building ships, not much is to be found. Now we look at the different types of ships and their measurements as specified in Yukti Kalpataru. So what you see here, there are 2 broad columns. You have one column called Samanya, which is ordinary ships, and a second column called Special, Unnata, which is sea going. So let us look at Samanya. So you have Kshudra, you have Madhyama, you have Bhima, formidable, then Chapala, moving to and fro, then Patala, with covering, Abhaya, not dangerous, Dhirga, tall, and Patraputa, like a folded leaf, and then Garbhara, with inner compartments, and Mantara, curved. Now in all these you have all these measurements. You have the length, breadth and height. In fact, I have put all the measurements in meters, whereas in their original measurement it was little different, but it's easy for us, so I have converted them all into meters. So you have length is 4.57 meter. It ranges from 4.57 meter up to 34.28 meters. That is the length that we are talking about. Breadth, similarly, I have arranged it in that roughly in that order. Breadth is from 1.14 meters to 17.14 meters, and the height is again from 1.14 meters to 17.14 meters. So this is the kind of things that you see here. On the other hand, if you are talking of sea-going ships, they have to be obviously much bigger. That's why the largest of them is 50.27 meters as opposed to 3.25 meters that you see there. So 50.27 meters, again different names are there, there are different measurements that you see here. So all these are clearly showing that for example you have Dharini, you have Plavini, Jangala, Tari, Gamini, etc., etc. There are different names given, and Vagini, that goes with good speed and so on. Measurements, all these clearly point to the existence of different types of ships, existence of different purposes for which these ships are being used and so on. So this much detailing is there. Whereas we look at the Vriksha Ayurveda, there are 4 types of wood have been specified. I mean, Yuktikalpataru says that 4 types of wood have been specified, and according to Yuktikalpataru, the wood that is light, hard and cannot be joined easily is the ideal one for shipbuilding. It actually cautions against using 2 different kinds of wood while making a ship. It's also mentioned that iron should not be tied to a sea-going vessel using a string, because iron may be attracted by magnetic forces in the sea and may cause danger. So these kinds of explanations are there. The other thing that you see in Yuktikalpataru is some vivid descriptions of the specifications for the building the ships with cabins. So a ship with a cabin extending from one end to the other is suitable for transport of royal treasure, horses and women. On the other hand, a ship having a cabin in the middle is suited for use during the rainy season and pleasure trips of kings. A ship having a cabin in the front is convenient for the dry seasons, for long voyages and naval warfare and so on. So all these details that you see very clearly indicate that Indians were in the know of shipbuilding. Of course, at that time shipbuilding was using wood, and maybe since Indians knew steel, they might have used a little bit of steel, but certainly they were of wood by and large. But intricate details of the actual process, or even the different components which will be assembled into a ship, those kinds of details are there. But these things that you see and the literature evidences show that they are in the know of shipbuilding. That's what we thought we will see in this particular video. We will conclude this section with an overall understanding of what happened to all these science and technology, why are what's happening to it now, and all those kinds of issues we will discuss in the next video and conclude this section.